was drawing comics therapy for me. It was, I guess you could call it therapy. I don't know. It was kind of just a way of coping with the world.
Right here before you, as we look down on this, is a book called Monsters by Windsor-Smith. It's a massive amount of work. As you can see on the back of it, it's a pretty good description of what the book is about, but it doesn't tell you what to expect and what you're going to be reading here. The year is 1964. Bobby Bailey doesn't realize he is about to fulfill his tragic destiny when he walks into a U.S. Army recruitment office. Secretive, damaged, innocent, trying to forget a past and looking for a future. Bobby's the perfect candidate for a secret U.S. government experimental program and an unholy continuation of a genetics program that was discovered in Nazi Germany nearly 20 years earlier in the waning days of World War II. Bailey's only ally and protector, one Sergeant McFarlane. He intervenes, which sets off a chain of escalating events that spin out of everybody's control. As the titular monsters multiply, becoming real and metaphorical, the story reaches a crescendo of moral reckoning. Now, over the years, I've heard whispers, I guess, little rumors, of Barry Windsor-Smith projects that were in the works. The first one was 1994. I'd already been in comics for 17 years. And I heard that, he pitched something to Vertigo, and he had something at Marvel that had, been turned down. This was the first comic book shop that I was hanging out in our town that had opened that lasted a year, and other comic book collectors were telling me this. Years later, somewhere lost in my memory, I don't know if it was something online or if it was in a Wizard magazine or an interview, but I do remember Neil Gaiman saying that he had seen a Barry Windsor-Smith project that he'd been working on for 20 years, and it was amazing. That was in the 2000s. And now we're in 2021, May specifically, and Barry Windsor-Smith will be turning 72 before this month, before the month is over. So this book actually came about from a Hulk story around 1984 that was rejected, and I think it was going to be a single issue. I was able to get caught up on the little backstory of this book from other YouTubers and friends and stuff. Didn't realize that the whole time I was hearing about the same book that had little whispers off and on. So Barry Windsor-Smith turned 72, which means he spent over half his life in one way or the other working on this book. How he did it, I don't know. But for a man who is, when you see the artwork and the backstory about it, he has put a massive amount of work into this. I cannot imagine the hours, months, years put into this artwork that is absolutely exquisite. It's a journey, and if he's going to put that much amount of time into it, into a project like this, over half his life, I plan on savoring it.
Reading comic books up to that time, they're very low-grade medium. You had superheroes, and you had funny animal characters, and you had Archie teenage comics, and war comics, crime comics, science fiction comics. There wasn't anything really like in the comic book world that was a personal artistic expression of the artist himself. It just didn't exist, wasn't there. And
now we live in an interesting time here for us old timers who've been doing comics for a while. Basically because we're seeing the resurrection of a lot of dead stories that are coming about. This being one. Last Ronin being another. This is a leftover plot from the 80s that was thought up by Eastman and Laird, the original guys. And then next month we have Dave Sims. You can be able to pre-order this month for a book coming out in about 2 months, and probably a lot of people have got it through Kickstarter. The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim, which has been talked about for quite a while. It's coming out. Now, what's great about these plots coming out is there has not been a book, probably in over a decade, that has had me this pumped to do a video, to talk about, to go on a journey, to savor, take my time, do a video. These storylines come from a time where comic books were getting validation through authors like Alan Moore, works that show exactly what you could do in a comic book that you can't do in any other medium, like Watchmen and Dark Knight. So Barry Windsor-Smith's original Hulk plot actually predates these works. And that's just fine, because a lot of creators, not all of them, there's a few, if you play around on YouTube, you know who they are, have said these comic books aren't for us. Feel like we should have been pushed aside. And that is just fine, because it has all been brought around full circle to where a lot of validation, in my opinion, with the comics have gone downhill. And this piece of work returns us to that. So basically, I'm only a little over 50 pages through this book. I'm ended up savoring it. And already the journey that this book has taken me, the emotions that this book is bringing out of me, and it's given me a feeling that not only is this book cathartic, possibly for Barry Windsor-Smith, but so far in the 50 pages, I'm reading into a statement possibly about comics. Barry Windsor-Smith is a master of this craft. His first comic published work was in 1967. And if I did my research right, this may be the first work of his to come out in 16 years. So a lot of the comic book tropes that are in here are purposeful. And I'm beginning to have a feeling that this work, everything means something, even if everything does not mean a lot. But we start out with a monster. Despite having this image on the front of what Billy Bailey becomes, so far he's not really even the main character in this. He's not even the monster, despite looking at it. Frankenstein, Incredible Hulk, I'm evoked by those, by knowing comic books.
Just a way of dealing with reality. I was so afraid and alienated, frightened little boy. And like being programmed to enter the world of work. Where am I going to fit into this? I was not interested in, how I was incompetent at anything that would give me a position of anything in business except mopping floors or something.
We think we're having an origin, and the book starts out in the 40s, 1949, at the Bailey home. And the first thing that happens is, I guess it's a stepfather has really done a number on a young Billy Bailey, and his mother's running from him. Now, as dark and as horrific an act this is, there's a lot going on with the lettering, how we can't understand what the stepfather is saying. I have never seen such line detail and cross-hatching and different techniques done in the art. That's why it has to be savored. This is a piece of art. We also have gotten used to the fact that comic books were sequential. And what I'm saying there is that one issue led to the other. There was a pacing and a flow, and comic books were used to. Splash page on the front page. Every 3 pages, we'd have some sort of action happen or something to move the story along. And usually we'd have a cliffhanger. Years went by, trade paperbacks became huge, and all of a sudden the structure of these stories ended up becoming made for trade paperbacks, 6-issue arcs, where when you read a trade, it had a different flow and a feel. Well, this one throws all that out the window, because this is one huge story that has a pacing and a flow that is refreshing. It's not single issues. It's not thought of as a trade. It comes across as one big story. If there was one flaw in the book, it's a wonderful flaw, is that it takes its time, immerses you into each setting in the book, each era that the book comes up to, because it jumps to 1964. And Barry Windsor-Smith does not give a crap about having to worry about a cliffhanger or every 3 pages having something to move that issue along. And that is a wonderful thing. So the wonderful flaw is, once you start reading, you can't find a place to really stop and put your bookmark in and return to it. It is that captivating. By having this unique flow and pacing that is masterful, you are immersed into the story yourself. So with the knowledge of knowing where the book came from, what started out, we sort of had the feeling that Billy Bailey as a kid may have been Bruce Banner with the abusive father. And all of a sudden that switches where we have a version of Billy Bailey where he's older, and you can tell that he is just not right. Probably, we assume, from that beating he took as a kid. We evoke Steve Rogers in the 40s. Sergeant McFarlane pops up. Knowing that he won't make it into the Army, McFarlane's a recruiter. Billy Bailey gets very excited after he's pretty much homeless and floating around. He thinks he makes it in the military, and he's being handed off for that government project. So now we have the tropes. And when I heard about the Nazi scientist thing, I'm actually very tired of that comic book trope, if you will. I don't think it's worked since Hellboy, but they are the ultimate bad guys. But this is when I started realizing that Barry Windsor-Smith knows his audience. He knows that we are comic book collectors and comic book fans. He knows people that read his books. I can't read his mind, and I could be completely wrong on his intentions, but it's nice to connect with a book and also feel like you connect with the creator with this knowledge, because he's not changing any of the tropes, but he's making them work in a different way by connecting with a reader. My people and the people that read this and know their comic books, they're going to recognize these tropes, and I'm going to mess with them. And he's able to bring out emotions. So after Billy Bailey is given over to the government, who treat him like crap, just talking to him, and meanwhile he's very excited thinking he's going to be a soldier, McFarlane is racked with guilt, and he has nightmares that are horrific and amazing. And the emotions come down, and the images pop up, to where he ends up being told to take time off of work, if you will, go home and relax. And he can't do it. He ends up spending 6 weeks just depressed. And this is what we have. We have story of two families. And we're in the home of one family in 1964. And we're just seeing the emotions and the guilt and getting to know McFarlane and slowly beginning to realize there's something else going on. Meanwhile, we check back on the Proteus Project that Billy Bailey is in. And again, this is, like I said, everything means something, but maybe not everything means a lot. But we see what science is. You have children born from the womb, through nature, if you will. And Billy Bailey is being reborn. He ends up having to spend months. I think it does mention 9 months. I could be wrong. Out of a tank we never see that is a horrific scientific womb where we're distorting creation. He's actually being reborn. And he knows something is wrong as the scientists check in on him, and he's eventually taken out of the tank. And they're talking about massive, horrible smells and everything. And this is around the time where I have savored the story. And this is getting close to where I quit, because I could tell this was something special right away.
And being a comic book artist was the lowest level of commercial art. Comic book artists were embarrassed to admit that that's what they did for a living in those days. But being an outcast and alienated person, and feeling my way and my ego, I thought I'll push toward a more personal use of this medium.
Sergeant McFarlane, after spending weeks and weeks moping around the house, knowing the government is watching him, goes down into his basement, and we find out that he has Golden Age comics hidden. And he's down in the basement, he's reading, and he's talking to someone that's not there. Then his son comes down, sees the comics, gets very excited, says they're not for him. Now, if you've been a comic book collector for several years, what Barry Windsor-Smith at least did for me on my journey with this story was bring me back around to where I am both McFarlane and I am this little kid. This is me when I saw the stepdad and the uncle's comics. This is me when I'd go visit my uncle. He lived in a different town after he moved out. And I would be able to get into his TV room, and he had all his comic books in a little chest. And I could open them up, and it was magic. Being a little kid, being excited. Then you have the father, who I would be now, older, looking back on the older comics and the history and thinking back and remembering things. All of a sudden, if you're a comic book collector, you're connecting with this. But then he plays around with the idea of comic books in the real world. This is very this is maybe perhaps subtext, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's therapeutic. I don't know. But when the little kid tells his mother, McFarlane's wife, about the comics, she says, "They aren't for you. They're garbage. Comics are garbage. I'm going to throw them out when he's not looking." And then Barry Windsor-Smith has, and this is what we've had for years, the stigma of comics when I was younger. Comic book creators used to lie about working in comics and stuff. He's touching on this. This is the 60s. Barry Windsor-Smith, being born in, I believe, 1949, would have been probably the same age as this kid in 1964, and this is probably the attitude of comics that he may have heard about. And then Barry Windsor-Smith connects with us again, and he does the horrific, brings out another emotion of the reader. McFarlane starts ripping the comic books. And that's when I was like, oh my God. So McFarlane and his wife are having problems. He's trying to be there for him. Things are going on. And then we're starting getting more of a plot. And he sets her down and says, "I'm always trying to tell you what's wrong with me, but you never listen." So all of a sudden we become his wife, and we're trying to listen to him and decipher his story of what he's trying to tell us. So we have a book here that I plan on savoring. I think it's 360 to 365 pages, one big story. And as I said towards the beginning of this review and this video, I'm on a journey with this. I'm going to be deciphering this. There's subtext in this, and I want to enjoy this. But I could not wait to finish the entire story, to do a video to get out how wonderful this is, and hopefully other people will pick it up. This is also the first book in quite a while. I've been on YouTube for 10 years, seen many a YouTuber come and go, seen many a YouTuber stick around for the long haul, and they're still around. And I've seen quite a few of them be excited by this book. I cannot think of the last time that truly happened with everybody. So there you go. I'd like to thank Barry Windsor-Smith for making this magnum opus. I'm sure I had other things I could say about it. But for me, the return of the validation of comics, a pure masterpiece work of art, this will be going beside some of my more precious comics in my collection.